Hello, my name's Imogen Fitt. I work for a healthcare market intelligence company in the UK called Signify Research. Signify Research covers a range of healthcare technology markets, everything from medical imaging equipment, MRI, CT, X-ray, down to digital health. So IT within and outside of the hospital ecosystem.
Hi, I'm Nicolas Dubost. Medexprim is a European leader in clinical real-world data. We were born as a software house providing software tools to hospitals to do research with radiology data in particular. And as we grew, we found out that there was a much more attractive and dynamic market in real-world data. So we moved into that.
My name is Pascal Sempé. So the reason I joined Medexprim is this, as Nicolas explained, this turn from being a software company installed in the hospitals to a company that is helping partners to leverage patient data, basically bring the evidence from the real world data.
So Signify's clinical real-world data research report grew organically from our other market research. So we already had established contacts within the EHR ecosystem, within other healthcare IT businesses, and in guiding them on their strategic directions within those markets. Increasingly, they started asking us about the topic of real-world data. And there was a definite need to provide clarity in exactly what their role would be in providing that data. What the study is intended to do is answer the questions around how to make the most use of that clinically housed data, how to bring it into a commercial reality, and how to eventually get to the topic of actually achieving personalised medicine. So in culmination, the topic looks at clinical real-world data, how to get it into use, the challenges behind it, but it also looks at the commercial opportunity in producing what we would call a data unification platform.
We're very excited to read the Signify and Imogen's report because it's shining light on this segmentation where we are located, and we are convinced that this is where real world data shines at best in innovation, because it's in the clinic, in hospitals, where innovative treatments are being pursued, tested, and where the most valuable data is being produced, and the most difficult exercise is about getting this data together.
So roughly, and I am generalizing, you have two types of clinical data housed within a healthcare institution, what we would term structured versus unstructured. So your structured data, things like age, sex, where you live, your gender, your ethnicity, etc., etc. Often that can be very useful, and that's where the majority of clinical real-world data projects are situated today, focusing on. But unstructured data is a lot more complex, but also arguably it has a lot more potential. But the unstandardized, unstructured data is where I think the real treasure trove of information can be. And that includes things like medical images, which aren't annotated. Things like, when analysed, can provide quite a lot of use to researchers. One of the key things I think holding back a lot of research today is there is not an efficient way to manage large scales of that unstructured data as yet.
There's a lot of things you can automatically extract. Medexprim has developed this suite called the Medexprim suite that is sitting in the hospitals and does a lot of that work automatically. The other thing, all this curation, this quality control, moving it to a kind of a standard format that you can replicate across hospitals, that's also very important because, as you said, all the IT systems generate formats that are different. But at the end of the day, it's not magic. NLP exists, right? But it's still not magic. There's quite a significant part of manual curation that you need to do, and the way we work, usually we send, CRAs, clinical research associates, on sites to go and look into those unstructured data and kind of in a way structure them the best we can.
I think the driver for this industry is the demand for research, be it industrial and academic. It's trying to structure the unstructured for a cohort to answer a specific clinical question. We are pragmatic and we see projects emerging, and you can create great value around cohorts that you create with the hospitals to answer their questions or the industrial questions, both being oftentimes quite similar.
I definitely agree, Nicolas. I mean, you've got a growing number of real-world evidence studies that are being used to approve drugs in global markets, not just in the US, but everywhere. You've got a lot of regionalization across healthcare IT systems. Europe is quite a bit better at this because you often have these public national health bodies. But even within those, you get single vendors covering, a handful of hospitals with one single IT architecture.
There can be longitudinality that you don't have data regularly captured, or a given variable you don't have. I think this is another big value of this European approach to look for much more customized data sets. Let me take you an example. In the projects for which we source data, we have maybe, let's say, around 200 variables that we collect, and most of them are kind of mandatory in some specific diseases. Mandatory means that we always, if you take a genetic test, for example, what you know is, was the test provided? Was it done in the first place? And if it was done, what was the result? Was it positive? Was it negative? Is there a value? Because in most cases, in most databases I know from other, commercial database, you just have the result, positive, negative. But you don't know how many patients have been really tested for that. And you cannot do anything without them. So if you know how many patients had the test performed and what was the result, that's much, much better. It doesn't mean that you have a value for each patient, but you know what has happened.
Incompleteness can be somewhat cured when there is material out there that allows for it. Biological material, whole slide imagings, radiology data that is to be quantified and explored. So incompleteness is not always a dead end. It can be somewhat cured.
You can put all of the data that you want into an AI, and the algorithm can be as sophisticated as you like, but if the data itself isn't right, then you won't be able to get the use out of it. You can combine different data sets to kind of fill the gap, as it were, and that's, there's great examples of that in the US where you combine claims and healthcare related data to fill in those gaps and make that data more usable. I would also highlight that there is, two kinds of use for clinical real world data. There's the retrospective use, where you're looking at past populations of data and comparing it to something that you're doing now. But there is also prospective use of clinical real world data. Increasingly, we're seeing whispers of setting up, post-surveillance market studies. So a drug has been approved and we have let it into the world, and now we would like to monitor the large-scale populations and just make sure that everything's all right and that everything's going, as it should be, and that there's no adverse side effects within the whole population, because we couldn't possibly monitor that before we approved it.
You see that a lot, where an FDA, an EMA, or any local regulation body will provide a kind of fast-track authorization for testing your drug in real patients. And you really need those prospective data. You really need to be able to collect those patient data along the trial, and be able to collect them kind of real time in a way, because you really want to know what's happening now. Even things like external control arms and things like that. When you have a drug on a fast track, you also need to be able to compare those patients to what's happening with what you would call standard of care. So That's another big challenge of clinical real-world data, is in support of those clinical trial processes that so far have been very stringent, very restrictive. Standard of care are changing all the time. New therapies are coming, especially in oncology. So you have to be super reactive. And that's why real-world really bringing a big value there.
And it can offer a huge advantage in rare diseases where, you know, the patient population that has that disease globally today is so small that you're never going to get enough participants in a clinical trial to make something statistically significant. And to say to somebody, you know, we've got this drug, it may work, but we need you to be in the control group that doesn't actually have access to that drug. You know, I can understand why I think that's, you know, amazing. Most commonly heard about are the pharmaceutical companies or your medtech development firms who are looking to produce a therapeutic and get it out into the market. But you've also got increasingly a number of AI startups that are maybe looking for data with which to train new algorithms and get it to a point where it can be commercialized. To prove whether or not something is covered under the terms of their insurance plan. Regulators and public health bodies are trying to use that within their decision making. CROs are increasingly being contracted as well on behalf of pharma and other types of companies to use real world data. But then I also mentioned the internal stakeholders within the hospital as well. Clinicians who maybe want more of a longitudinal view of the patient history than they would be able to obtain normally. There's also academics who can use it for internal, you know, research, anything from a clinical trial to just drug development, that type of early stage research. And also administrators. So, you know, this is health related information, but it's also information about healthcare institutions and how they run, how efficient they are. Digital pathology would be a great example of that. In today's market, you can't really tell whether or not that's going to provide like a substantial return on investment over a set number of years. From my studies, the bulk of the market today is that internal hospital academic administrator department, because they're the ones who are paying, you know, multi-millions to companies with those data aggregation platforms. But the real opportunity is within those pharmaceuticals and payer organizations that are third-party researchers and that have a lot of challenges to overcome with patient personal health information and making sure that that's protected and deciding what data stays in the hospital and when. Those are the ones that are really going to drive the market forward and get us towards that personalised healthcare.
We see a convergence between all these different interests with concrete examples, working on a cohort triggered by a pharma or AI company, which is then feeding into an academic research project, with this academic project being monocentric at the beginning, asking us to collide for an academic project the similar other pieces of the multicentric cohort so that they can push the academic research further. Physicians and companies would agree that they ask themselves the same question.
We're at the beginning stage, nascent stages, so there's going to be a lot of rapid change over the next few years. Medical imaging, I think, is one of the areas that has a lot of potential that isn't used very much, but that should explode over the next few years in terms of aggregating that data and mining quantitative elements like new biomarkers for studies. It's going to be unrecognizable within a very short period of time. And it's just a matter of keeping track of the developments as they're ongoing and trying to look at the next 2 to 3 years, because you won't really predict the next 5 to 10, as it were.
One of the big change to come is that the gap of maturity of these markets is going to narrow between the US and Europe. But essentially today, the real world data market in the US is quite structured, driven by large players, and produces significant value for the industry. Europe is really, really far behind in terms of numbers and structuring. And well, Medexprim intends to be a player there to narrow the gap, because we are positioned in this European real-world data market. And we were talking earlier about incompleteness of data. I think that is something that we can partially cure in Europe, going back in the hospitals and filling the gaps to some degree.
The better use of clinical real-world data is transforming very significantly the way you perform drug development and clinical trials in particular. Using real-world data allows to do trials the way you didn't do them before. We spoke quickly about external control arms, for example, but things like basket trials now, where a company is going to be able to test the effect of this drug working on a mechanistic model, different indications at the same time. This is something you would never do before. The fact that you have those fast tracks, you can start to put your drugs on the market much faster, as long as you collect those real-world data very seriously.
You know, real-world data can be used anywhere along, virtually anywhere along the drug development timeline, but even in biomarker discovery or in the development of companion diagnostics tests, for example. Now, that's a topic that is coming up very frequently within medical imaging AI, is identifying those unique biomarkers that might indicate that a certain stratification of a population might be able to respond better to a drug than somebody else. If you'd like to learn anything more about the study that I was speaking about Signify Research, please see Signify Research's company website or LinkedIn page. I'm always available to contact through email, so Imogen Fitt at signifyresearch.net, and always happy to pick up the phone for a quick chat.